So, let me get this rolling here. See if we can have some fun with that. Recapping the auction. Um, Today we're gonna just try to go over things. I have Jake with the NC State group just kind of hovering in the background. So we'll see if we can get some insight from him over the time. I was gonna have Lewis join us, but Lewis is dealing with a deer carcass in his car at the moment. His wife ran into a deer, so he is indisposed at the moment, and maybe will join later. So I have a few items that I love to just kind of talk about through this review, kind of go over trends, what kind of things did we see, kind of talk about what takeaways that we got from this,
Here we
look at
go.
some data, and just kind of handle things. So, Jake, thanks for hopping on. We'll see if you have any insight on this. Feel free to make any rude comments.
Oh yeah, let me say something before we get going.
All right.
Just want to say go Knicks.
Oh,
That's all I got.
yeah. Okay. Well, that added so much to the stream. Thank you. Uh, so with everything said, we'll move into this. First and foremost, I think I had a stressful time with this auction. Um, it was something I don't know if I anticipated. Um, a lot of things that did happen. One, I just had too much going on with 100 teams, having to peruse the auction and seeing things how they unfolded. But ultimately, I think it was fun for a lot of people. I got a lot of great feedback. I think it was incredibly engaging. We saw a lot of teams bid and bid a lot, and a lot of teams walked out with I think a close to 30-man roster, at least as to this point. So we did have a few hiccups. We had a few people back out like the very first day. They just couldn't figure out what this format is, which is disappointing to see because we put so much effort in the upfront to give people an understanding of the strategy. So it's unfortunate that we had to go through those things. We had a few hiccups with technical issues too, but I think overall things went pretty smoothly. Hopefully, people understood what was happening in the middle of the auctions, and we'll just kind of look through things, see what kind of information we can gain out of this, and then probably near the end we'll talk about who we think walked away with a lot of the best things. So um, we're lucky at this point because if Lewis was in here, we probably would be 5 minutes deep into how good of an auction he had. But with the fact that he's not here, I think we can kind of segue into. I think every auction was a little bit different. I think a lot of people saw some interesting trends in their own auction. And I think we ultimately saw a few different flavors of how teams approach this. One, I'll put a caveat on this. Minor conference, when we look at any of this data, is going to skew a lot of this information. They had an entirely different auction, I think, from just the people standpoint that was in that auction to also just the overall structure of them. The fact that they had two more or four more teams competing um, led to some very different results, and they kind of affected things like averages for player copies and those types of things. But I think overall, we saw some very interesting trends. One, I think, was the biggest trend was looking at one player copy versus the other. And I think the consensus was that most of the second copies were going cheaper than the first ones. I don't know if you guys saw this in ACC at all, Jake, but we saw in Big Ten quite a few of the second copies were going like a few dollars cheaper to some. I think we saw like a Trevor Lawrence went for like $17 cheaper, and
Yeah,
those things
we
were.
it was weird because at first it was doing that, and then towards the end, I think more people saved,
Mm-hmm.
so the second copy would go for a few dollars more actually. So it was a little. It kind of changed through the entire auction, which was pretty cool. Bad for the people that were saving though. They got a little bit more of a upcharge, but they could afford it.
Yeah, I think that was definitely one of the strategies. There were a few teams in Big Ten that, like Michigan and Northwestern, that saved a bit of their money till the kind of midway point of the auction where they had a bunch of money and people were spending kind of very fast and furiously at the beginning, and then they ended up getting some cheaper deals. But I think near the end, Michigan made a comment in our auction that he was kind of waiting for the bottom to fall out and then him to get a bunch of deals on players. And I don't know if that necessarily came to be in the grand scheme of things. Like if you looked overall, I think he got some great deals, but I think the where he was expecting to get deals didn't necessarily come, or the how much of a deal he got was, I think, a bit less than what he was anticipating. But
Yeah, I think a lot of people I was talking to too, like Georgia Tech, was kind of the same way. They were talking to me about getting deals later in the auction, but the deals were a few dollars a piece. They weren't like $10 to $15. I thought a second copy would go for significantly cheaper, but I didn't see any of that in the ACC at least. I didn't really look around the other conferences to see that yet.
yeah, I think it was pretty much the same. So in the data here, when I was looking at different positions, so like quarterback, running back, the average prices of each player, and I think in total we had like 2,000 as of this morning, 2,833 players acquired, and that's including all the different copies. So like there's 12 copies to a player in this league, so there was 12 Justin Herberts and those things. But looking at the average prices for per copy, like quarterback, the average quarterback went for 24. The first copy and the second copy went for only $23. Granted, there's a lot of $0 players in those numbers, but overall they were pretty close. Like running back was at $14 and $15. Wide receiver was essentially the same price, and then tight end was about the same price. So I think overall things kind of leveled out by the end of the auction, but there were definitely swings throughout during the auction that I noticed quite a bit. Like Z-score, which is something I kept track of, and people who don't know what Z-score is kind of like looking at things on a standardized scale, so you're able to kind of compare two different things together based on how they are valued on a normal distribution. And Z-score, I kind of computed for each player copy the prices that they went for and which team got them, and kind of did some rough analysis and kind of plotted it on a chart here in the upper right of my data. And the teams that would skew farther to the left probably got more deals on them than the teams that got to the right. But in the middle of the auction, when I was kind of computing these things, I was noticing teams flying up and down that scale in terms of which players they were getting, because other players were coming off the board. And I think that's interesting, because I heard some other people after the fact that the Z-score metric that people were looking at during the auction was starting to inform their decisions on what they were going to do. And I was like, well, that's not what I was expecting per se to happen with this information, because the information was wildly volatile, where one copy of a player coming off the board could shift the average dollar amount a few dollars, and it would be enough to put a different Z-score on a player. So I thought that was very, very interesting from that standpoint, and how volatile things were. I also thought it was very interesting how volatile just the amount of money everyone had. I think we saw some pretty big swings in terms of which teams were spending a lot of money early versus late. Also, the different averages and how aggressive each conference was. Like I noticed through the auction, in the early going, Big 12 and SEC were really aggressive with their money. They had, I think Big 12 was maybe a factor of they had a lot more newer people to the format, so they were probably way more aggressive in how they were bidding. And SEC, I think they just have some individuals in there that are just outright aggressive, like Joey, who is
And Luigi.
yeah, and Luigi. They're from Vanderbilt and LSU respectively. They're much more aggressive auction players, and they will throw money out continuously until they don't have any. So I know those two would probably have an effect on how that auction was going. And then you saw the inverse where ACC and Pac-12 were a little more conservative with their dollar amounts and what they were giving for players. I think you guys near the end were picking up on your averages compared to the other ones, and you had just as many players coming off the board. So it clearly got to a point where a lot of teams were a lot more than other conferences were saving their money, and then they had to spend it at some point on players. And I think you kind of echoed that sentiment with like West and Georgia Tech, and I think
UConn was a big one.
yeah, UConn had a few MIA people that started swinging things later in the auction because they had to make up for lost time. So that was interesting from that standpoint. Big Ten was different because we ended up just being really consistent through the entire auction. Like we were aggressive, but we stayed aggressive till the very bitter end. I don't think we ever really got those deals. And I made a mention that before we started this that Michigan made a comment that he was waiting for the deals to happen, but they never materialized because he was saving money. And I think it was just the nature of the Big Ten. We just weren't really interested in giving deals to other teams, or we were much more willing to spend that money. I know a few times in the auction just tried to recycle the board to get a few dollars eked out, and had differing success on that strategy. But let me ask you this, Jake, did you walk into this auction with a plan at all, with an idea of what you wanted to do? Because I think that was something that was maybe across the board very different for people.
Yeah, so my plan, I had a pretty broad plan. I just wanted to spend about half of my money on wide receiver and the rest on running back and quarterback. And I kind of did that. I can look at my thing on the startup review, but it's not working for me right now. But I kind of wanted to not spend a lot of money on QB because I know we had a lot of QBs here, and I only have $400 to spend. And I think I did that with getting Daniel Jones and Jalen Hurts and getting Jordan Love off of the pricing force. But I think my plan was more of trying to keep all the other teams honest with my money at first. So price enforcing, and then picking up the players I wanted. I wanted juniors and sophomores mostly because I knew freshmen and seniors may have gone for a little over what I thought they were should be priced at.
Interesting. So did you wanted juniors and sophomores mostly?
Yeah, I kind of did that. I think, yeah. But I got a few seniors too. I don't know. I don't know how well it went. You can talk to me. You can tell me how well I did.
Let's take a look here. I think the quarterbacks is an interesting strategy. I think you got a high upside guy with Jalen Hurts, and his running ability in this type of league could be advantageous. I think Daniel Jones is was an interesting player in the auction in general because I don't think anyone was excited to land Daniel Jones. And
Yeah, it wasn't, but he was the cheapest available. So
available. Yeah, I think that's kind of the I think that's kind of what happened with anyone that grabbed him was like, okay, I got him, and he was the cheapest one available. Do you expect to get 2 years out of him, or do you only expect to get one?
I'm hoping only one. I'm hoping Jalen Hurts kind of takes that next step this year. I think Lewis is in here now. I think he's thinking the same thing or hoping the same thing. But yeah, I want him to kind of take over as my quarterback next year. So I guess 1 year for Daniel Jones would be good enough for me.
I would think so. That people who hopefully paid for him, especially if he was like paired with like a Sam Darnold player, I hope they're not thinking they get 2 years out of Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you're going to be potentially left without a quarterback at all next year.
He's going to graduate early.
He's not going to graduate early, Lewis.
You never know. You might. Win some awards.
Oh, yeah, I don't think he's gonna win anything. Yeah, I got him for $24, so I didn't think that was too much of an overpay. I was hoping to get him for less. I think his second copy actually went for less. Let me see. His second copy went to. Oh no, I was second copy. I got him for $3 less than 27. So it was 27 at first, and then 24. So I actually got the deal on him, but I was hoping to get him for like 19. because I don't think he'll. I don't want to. I don't want to rely on him next year. I'll have to get another QB if Jalen Hurts doesn't work out.
I like the. I think it was very interesting. Well, you got Josh Jacobs too, but I think it's interesting what happened with James Robinson in this auction. I don't know what you got him for per se.
I think I got him for 16, 17. I can look it up.
But he
I
was,
he was
one
for-
that had a very depreciated price when you compare him to like I don't know, other running backs that were, even Josh Jacobs was going like $30, $40 in a lot
Yeah.
of places. And I think Robinson went for 25 on average.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I got him for 16. A lot of other teams kind of like the median was 16. The lowest was 13. Alabama got him for 13, and he was what, a top 5, top 10 running back last year?
Yeah, he was top 5 for sure.
People are afraid because of, I guess, Etienne coming in, which is, I mean, understandably, but you never know with Urban Meyer. So hopefully he pays off.
Yeah, I don't think he disappears.
No, he doesn't. He's gonna be the bruiser of the group, and I mean, he was never fast. He wasn't fast last year either, so he's not gonna be fast this year. But I think he's gonna get a lot of the carries, while Etienne gets a lot of the kind of like the pass catching. Maybe they motion him out and get some mismatches. So I don't know. I think it's a good. It was a good low end kind of running back you can get. Nice cheap one.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see what you do with all your wide receivers, though. It seems like you went for some senior guys that are going to probably give you something this year, like Gallup and Chark, but then are gone next year regardless, unless something like medical happens.
Yeah, we'll see what that. I'm gonna redshirt all these freshmen, but I didn't get any good ones. I'm hoping Debo Samuel kind of makes a step up as well. And I got Terry McLaurin as a junior, which is nice. But I got a few sophomores as well that I'm hoping for, like Henry Ruggs and Jalen Reagor. So we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping those guys. I like those guys. I have them in a lot of other leagues, and I want to get them in this league because they're kind of cheaper, especially Reagor with was it Devonta Smith that went there or Jalen?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Devonta Smith. Yeah. So a lot of people are kind of down on him. So I feel like I got him for a little bit cheaper than he could have gone for if he hadn't gotten had competition come in this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's definitely like a guy whose value is there now because it seems to have tanked over the season. I think rightfully so. He didn't really do much.
Yeah, no, he didn't do great.
But you never know.
Plus, he was at TCU as a college student, and they had a pretty bad quarterback, so I think he needed another year to develop. And I don't know. I know Jalen Hurts isn't much of an upgrade over Carson Wentz, but I'm hoping this new regime kind of figures it out for him.
Yeah, hopefully they do. Lewis, we were kind of talking about general trends, and we were leading into the idea of did you come into this auction with any plans?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did?
Yeah, I had plans. As for general trends or tendencies, I'm not sure there were. There was a lot of chaos, at least in minor. Yeah. Absolute chaos. Like, I knew it was going to be crazy, but it got out of hand so quickly that I just sat back and watched because it wasn't something that I wanted to partake in, like you guys were just talking about.
Give me a break. You partaked in it. You stirred the pot relentlessly.
Yeah. I stirred the pot, but like I wasn't trying to like win those players because you guys were just talking about James Robinson and you know that median price point of like $16 somewhere around 16 to $20. The cheapest one was 13. The first copy of Robinson in minor went for like $40, and it was one of those where I was like,
oh yeah, San Diego State.
Nope. Like he was a target of mine, and I think the first, I can't remember. I wish I could like sort and see which one was the first copy. I guess I could.
The first copy for minor?
Yeah.
It was.
I guess I could find them.
$40 to San Diego State.
So the second one went kind of cheaper, but at that point, like $27, $30, whatever it was that the second guy went.
Yeah, 27.
I'd rather have spent the money somewhere else. But James Robinson, guys like those, like that's what I wanted to target. That was kind of what my game plan was, and I think you can see that from at least my team. I went for like, I'll call it organizational depth, like from top to bottom. I just kind of wanted a bunch of guys that were in like the $25 to $30 range, and then go from there, see what sticks, see what doesn't. Because I kind of went, my strategy was that year one is practically going to be a fluke. Like whoever wins, no offense, like I'm sure you did a great job setting your lineup and in your auction, but typically year one is just going to be a fluke in here, with no real strategy to it. The best team typically never wins, so it's going to be somebody like has a breakout player, or someone gets hurt and then somebody owes the backup, and that guy's ends up being the RB1. Something like that is what's going to put teams in the top portion of the format. And so with there also being 100 teams, it's like chances of winning year one or even year two to that matter aren't really high, just because I think there's too much flukiness to them. I think where you start to see teams get really good and be good is years 3, 4, 5, and 6, when the format actually has some power to it, where you've got to have a team built, you've got to have that depth built. And so that's what I just try to do. I try to do the depth. Maybe some of these guys catch, maybe some of them don't. All it takes is a couple of them to outperform where I bought them at, and it's a good deal for me. And at least, moving forward now, next year's auction, I can at least target specific players where there's going to be a good bit of teams that are going to still have to target depth because they didn't do a very good job of getting anything more than 4 or 5, players with really nice names.
Yeah, I think we were talking about that. A lot of the teams with the seniors are probably going to do a lot better this year, and then they'll have nothing next year.
I don't know if you guys talked. I don't know how long you were on here, so I don't know if you talked about any what would you call it? Any potential teams that you liked, or that you thought. But I mean, some of the teams, like you almost have to break it down into categories. Like there are teams that have really nice players, but they're going to be good for 10 to 12 weeks. That's it. Then they're going to lose the Lamar Jacksons and the Saquon Barkleys and all that other stuff. And then you look at next year and you're like, good luck. Like, what are you going to do? So you almost have to break it into like winners and losers into like a couple of different sections, because some of these teams, even though they're really good on paper, they are going to be like terrible for the format.
Yeah, and I think some of them know that too. Like I think Colorado State is one that comes to mind with that strategy of like going in pretty senior heavy. I think they went really senior heavy. I can pull them up here. They had like, I don't know, most of their team was seniors, and it honestly was just kind of appalling. But they created like a super stacked roster where they have like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. That's a little redundant for this format to have both of them, but they got Chubb, Dobbins. They also have James Robinson. They got Chark, Mecole Hardman, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley. Like, this team is good for this year. Next year, they're probably losing like 6, 7 top end players, and he knows that because he's talked about this. So I think he's just trying to see if he can get this like whatever money he can now and see what happens, which I think is interesting. Like the thought of going all for it and see if you get more recruiting dollars, and does that start your rebuild a bit faster than next if you were just bad like what I'm doing, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, you could have started that rebuild now rather than start it. I mean,
well, yeah, that's kind of like what I did.
You have a little money to start it, but you're a year behind now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think
well, if he wins it doesn't matter, I don't think. For him, at least. I think that's his plan. I think he's hoping he wins, and then...
But that's the thing, though. I mean, you're talking about already, so your chances of winning are 1 out of 100. And then you have to... And that's without taking into any consideration for bad luck or any of that other stuff. Like, your odds of winning this are fucking terrible. And it's even more fluky year one. Which, I mean, it's the same thing. Like, I don't know who you're talking about, I missed, but, like... The Duke Blue Devils are the exact same way. A team that you go, okay, yeah, they did really good. They've got Lamar Jackson, they've got Saquon Barkley, they've got Chase Edmonds, they've got DJ Moore, they've got Calvin Ridley, they've got Dallas Goedert. They're going to score 105 points a game. Problem is okay, that's good for 10 weeks. Next year, you got no quarterback. There's no quarterback solution on that roster beyond Lamar Jackson. The running backs options are Miles Sanders, and hopefully Michael Carter works out. That's it. And then there's not a whole lot of wide receiver. Maybe Kadarius Toney, but other than that, like, it's a team that's gonna go from having like 100 points to like probably not even having 4 guys who are starting next year.
Do you want to defend him? Because I think this is your friend here.
No, I had the same thought, but I didn't really tell him because I wanted to get my guys to run the same auction. But I think he knows that he kind of went early. He paid for all these guys so early.
Yeah, he was one of the teams that was super early. He had the first couple guys off the board.
He had like 10 guys the first 2 days, and then he couldn't spend the money anymore because everybody else had money, and then he waited to the end to get a bunch of flyers. But yeah, I agree. He'll be good this year. He'll get ranked, I think, if there's no problems with Saquon again. But I thought
that's the other
a little
thing.
bit too much on seniors. Yeah, and I feel like Saquon was one of those guys that everybody paid a lot for, which I guess is, I mean, it's the thing to do because he's really good. But he hasn't played a full season since I think his second year.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a scary thing. I think he'll do okay this year. But yeah, like you're saying, I don't know. He's got Tony. He's got Amari Rodgers who might do something. He took a lot of flyers. He's got Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts might, I don't know. And Davis Mills, I guess, was his solution for quarterback next year, which you just have to see what happens with Deshaun Watson.
Right.
That's a whole other thing. Can't assume anything. But yeah, that's all I got.
It's crazy that
he got the cheapest Kyle Pitts too. Which
he got a lot of deals. That was the thing. I thought he was going to get screwed over by like just blowing his load so early, but most of his guys were less. Or at least a few of them were less than what they went for later.
Holy frick. I didn't look at this, but I'm looking at it now. So out of the 12 copies of Saquon was an average of $52 for a senior, which is kind of absurd.
That's crazy, right?
That is kind of absurd. There was a copy of him, and I imagine this has got to be minor, if I'm going to put any guess on which conference.
75?
75?
Baylor Bears.
Baylor.
Oh,
Baylor.
Fuck, man. $75 for a senior running back. He's good.
Oh.
Like, he is good. And I think Baylor's another one of those
great.
senior heavy teams, but I think Baylor was also super aggressive with getting seniors, and I don't think he's got a backup plan at all.
I'm looking at his team. He's got Josh Allen, senior, Kyle Allen. What's he got? Saquon. They got Nick Chubb. Yeah, so I guess his running backs are, but he's also got DeAndre Swift there. I think he spent a lot of
Calvin
money
Ridley.
early. Yeah, like he's.
Mark Andrews.
I'm like, he's kind of going to be like a middle of the pack team. I don't know. He didn't go full send on the seniors.
I guess
his starting lineup's probably going to be all seniors with.
Yeah, but you got like Jalen Waddle. He probably spent a lot for.
But for this season? Is there a better top 4 than having Josh Allen, Saquon,
you're right.
Chubb, and Swift, and then you throw in Ridley?
Yeah, with this
and Andrews.
The way it goes, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a better team.
He's going to be really good this year, I have a feeling. But I like Lewis mentioned, I don't think there's much of a plan for next year. There's going to be holes all over this roster.
Right, and that's kind of my problem with a lot of. I mean, you can only do so much and help out so much, but there are a lot of teams that went for this. Oh, I got to get every big name player. I've got to get Josh Allen. I've got to get Lamar Jackson, and it messes you up to where like this guy. I mean, the 3 teams here that we've talked about, most recently, like when these guys go on, like they're all gone unless you get an injury. I mean, but again, we're not gonna pray that somebody gets hurt, but all these guys are going to disappear, and then you look at, okay, what's available to step in. Okay, so maybe Jordan Love if something happens with Aaron Rodgers.
Nothing is
At
happening
quarterback,
with
but
Aaron
there's
Rodgers. You just stop that right now.
He's already out the door, I think.
Yeah,
No.
he's already got 2 feet out
No.
the door. The only other pieces that really stick are a DeAndre Swift, and then you're hoping that Jalen Waddle sticks, and beyond that, like, what do you do? So now you've got 6 roster spots to fill. You're gonna have a rookie draft next year, and a lot of these teams are gonna be in the same boat. You're gonna be like, okay, well, I need to get you're not gonna be able to go in and walk away with 4 or 5 guys to fill out your roster. You're just not going to, because you're gonna have to pay. Next year, if I'm trying to think of who the running backs and wide receivers would be atop of next year's class, but if you needed to add that top tier, if you needed the top tier running backs, you need maybe even the second tier, you need 2 of those guys. It's going to cost you probably $30 to $60 a piece. I would assume somewhere in that price range, without getting too crazy. And if you get one really, really good, talented guy that sticks out from the rest, I mean, that's where you start seeing, $75, $80 worth of a budget going towards that. I just don't think that teams are going to have, even if they do win awards and do all that other stuff, they're just not going to have the money to compete, because they're going to be too spread thin.
No, I think that's going to be hard. Like some of these senior level teams, these senior heavy teams, to really walk into next recruiting auction and just be able to like reload. I think it's got to be like a full blown, okay, we had our day in the sun, we tried this, we got what we could out of it, and then we got to kind of lay the foundation again to start anew. Because we had this question pop up a lot in the auction, during the auction, like, okay, how do you retool, or how do you reload your roster year over year? And sometimes you can't, for one, but some of it's also just trying to make sure that and this was probably the best opportunity to do that, is to set yourself up where you're not having too many holes year over year, because then you kind of have to start paying more in those auctions to get those like $60 players, especially if people see you need an obvious player to plug an obvious hole, then they're going to make you pay more. If they're smart, they're going to make you pay more for it. Like when we talked about the startup and the strategy for it, Lewis, you made mention of like when you don't have a QB, other teams clearly see that you don't have a QB, and they're probably going to make you pay even a higher premium to get that QB, especially if there's not that many there.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, when you now run the risk of like, okay, I've got to get 4 or 5 guys to plug into my line. Not only then, like, you're removing the strategy of, hey, I'm not going to redshirt them because I need them to play, but you're also like, somebody's going to go, oh, hey, this guy doesn't have anybody. He's going to try, his hardest to win these guys. It'll just jack the price up. And when that happens, you go from being able to win 3, 4 guys maybe in a really good class to just winning 1. I mean, and that's kind of the piece that I mean, I've talked to you about that. I wish we maybe went into depth about that more, so that people understood, what a roster is going to look like and what you can realistically expect to add to a roster. Because when you look at these drafts or auctions, especially like the NCFF, like, nobody's ever gone and said, oh, hey, I got 6, 7, 8 players out of this draft, they all hit. Like, it's usually like you're lucky if you get 3 or 4 that are worth keeping and not cutting the next year.
Yeah, and if you go quarterback, you're lucky if you get that quarterback.
Right. I mean, and that's kind of where I was like, okay, we've got teams that are like, some of these guys are like, oh yeah, I won, I got Jalen Waddle, or I got Jamar Chase, or I put all this money on those guys. Like, yeah, that's great right now, but if something happens where, I mean, we've seen that with N'Keal Harry, we've seen that with, I'm trying to think of the other guys that went through NCFF that were cost a whole lot of money and then just never panned out. He's just the most recent, I think.
Well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year was
I was going to say that, but
expensive, but didn't really play to that price. right?
Yeah, but I mean, he's still usable though. I wouldn't. Like N'Keal Harry. I think people dropped him. Like, I think he was a drop after 1 year. I think
He's definitely the obvious.
But yeah, I mean,
for sure.
Right. So I mean, so when that you run the risk of that happening too. Like, yeah, I mean, these guys are good in college and they get drafted high, but you're not going to guarantee hitting on this. And that's one of the things where I think that everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get the big names, I'm going to get the guys that hit, and that's just not. That's not how this works. So that's why I think that I like my even though I probably stretched it out too thin. Like, I wanted, for whatever reason, I was hell bent on having 30 guys worth of depth instead of having like 15 guys worth of depth and then having like some dart throws. But it at least gets me kind of some of the things that Brian was alluding to, is I've got pretty good coverage between I think I only have 3 seniors, and they were guys I didn't really want. Let me look. Maybe I only have 2. Nope, I have 3. They're all wide receivers. Christian Kirk, Alan Lazard, and Anthony Miller. But I have really good coverage between the junior class and then even more sophomores, and then I took a stab at a bunch of kind of different freshmen just across wide receiver, quarterback, and running back, just to kind of see if any of those guys stick. But I don't need them to, which is kind of the great thing about it. At least in my eyes, maybe I can get 1 or 2 of those guys to be serviceable like the rest of the players on my roster, and then next year it makes it a little easier for me where I can go, all right, I can specifically target players now where I don't have to worry about depth or position or whatever. I can go and say, hey, this guy's the best player on the board, I'm going to add him to my team, I win him. And I can do that with how my roster is structured probably for at least 2, maybe 3 years, where I could just pick off the top guy. Hopefully by year 3 that I have a full roster of players and then some top premier talent, which I'm hoping is how that works.
So here's a question Andy had asked in the chat. He said, do you guys foresee the 16-team 2-copy paradigm making it harder to price and force positionally weak at 1 spot teams? So like the idea that we posed with the quarterback being an obvious need is the fact that there's 2 copies make it harder to make them pay a premium with that position. I'm going to also kind of piggyback off this for Jake, because I know, and Lewis, did you find it harder to price and force with a second copy in place, just in general, this time around? Because this is a big tweak out of a format that I don't think any one of us have played in before. No. And I think that was definitely something that people echoed, that it was something they didn't really could prepare for through all of this.
Yeah, I thought it was a little weird. Trying to price and force with the second copy, like knowing there's a second copy, is kind of harder than with the second copy. Second copy is a little easier because you can, you just want to get it over that price of the first one. But I feel like it was just harder to gauge where the ACC was going to go with their prices, because some people were just letting their bids go when they seemed to really want the guy, but I would just like push it up, and then win the bid, and they wouldn't go for it, and then there'll just be someone else going after it. But I think it was a lot harder than just like in the NCFF or any other league that I tried, like the front office league, where it's a little different. But it's just easier knowing which guys want like what player, I think, and they can just get a second copy if they don't really want that player at that price. I think the second copy is kind of easier because it's basically you're just trying to get it to that point of the first one, and kind of once you get it over there, you're kind of like, I did it. Screw you. You got the higher copy.
Yeah. I agree and disagree. So I think you'll see it positionally, maybe especially at quarterback, at some point. I don't think you're going to see it for a few years though. One of my things, like with price enforcing with the second copy, I kind of liked it more. The first round kind of gets crazy. Everybody's feeling each other out. You can figure out who's really in on a player. I think it was Ohio. It was Ohio, myself, and somebody else. And I was just there to fuck around. Like, I had no intentions of winning Kyle Pitts. But, like, I got so intrigued in minor at the price point that I had bid on him a little bit, and then I was trying to bid on somebody else, Najee Harris, I think it was, and I put like an $80 bid, and I accidentally put on Kyle Pitts. Lo and behold, the dude's proxy was 79 or 75 or something like that. And so I reset Kyle Pitts. I'm freaking out. And somebody took him right back. It was one of those, like, it was almost like the madness of it, like having to have Kyle Pitts. Like, there was still a second copy to be had. And it was one of those, like, teams were just so set on, like, I got to have this guy, I got to have this guy, I got to have him now, that I don't know if the second copy really matters that much. There were too many guys that were not willing to let players be won by anybody but them. So I don't think that hurts it, but then it also, like, once that player goes off the board, it makes it real easy to know where, if Kyle Pitts goes off the board at 80, then somebody was at least pushing. And again, if I didn't reset him, it probably would have been $70 or something. And so once he goes off the board for that, you can go, okay, somebody were going at Kyle Pitts up until about the $70 range. And so then the second copy of Kyle Pitts goes for like 60 some dollars in minor. Like, I think it was like 63 or 4 or something like that. It might have been higher. I don't remember. I'm not looking, but I think that aspect makes it a little easier to price and force. But as to Andy's question about positional stuff, I think quarterback's the only place that you'll see that, just because there's so many different running backs and wide receivers. The wide receivers I don't think are ever going to be affected by that, but quarterbacks, you will see it. I don't think you see it anytime soon, though, because there were 5 this year that should get some run, and then there were a couple really good ones last year, and so that kind of floods the market. I think you'll see it come back, like, when you get those years where there's just like Matthew Stafford and somebody else at quarterback. Like, there's only 2 guys. So I think So I think you'll see that scarcity kind of come into play. But again, that's probably not for a few years, because I also think that most teams are pretty set at quarterback. I would say. I think there are too many teams. Like, there are a good bit of teams. Yeah, but they're very. I mean, when you're talking about 100 teams, like, there's like, and that's the thing too, where I almost was like, I shouldn't even spend money on a quarterback, because everybody else, at least in minor, has 2 quarterbacks, which is crazy because minor's the bigger division. And it's one of those where, like, I could, in theory, not spend any money in the startup on quarterback, and then grab a super cheap one next year as a rookie, because why would anybody that has 2-3 quarterbacks want to reinvest into the quarterback position? And so I almost thought about that. I was going back and forth with Brian. He's like, I think Joe Burrow's a good deal, so I bought Joe Burrow. But, yeah, I mean, that's probably the only position that I think you'd get that scarcity.
Yeah, I think it's I think you're right. It's very interesting that everyone pretty much got 2 cracks at getting, or a crack at getting 2 quarterbacks at some point in this auction. Like, I don't think anyone walked out. Very rarely a team walked out with just 1. I think there were even a few teams that walked out with 3, depending on how aggressive they were for quarterback. I don't think there are probably very few teams that are going to walk into next year that don't have a quarterback that it's going to be playable, which is interesting, because I think that's something I was kind of worried about when we were starting this. Or, like, are people going to realize that this position is just incredibly valuable, and, like, you can't compete without having a quarterback? And I still think, I'm interested to see how it plays out, but I still think you'll need a top-end quarterback to be, like, a contender for the national championship. Like, I just don't think there's any way you can work with 100 teams that you can't have, like, one of the top scoring quarterbacks in this format and realistically compete for that. I think it's just going to be too severe. So yeah, and Andy makes a comment in the chat saying there are about 15 to 21 quarterbacks that were worth rostering in this format, which means everyone usually gets about 2. And I think that was about what I computed, that this year there's probably that number. Now, next year, I think we could see some teams, the pool shrink a bit, because players like Drew Lock and Daniel Jones and those types of guys might not have a job, and they're going to be seniors where you would think they might have another year. But I think for the most part we have a healthy pool, and if that pool ever gets thinner, then we'll see some really crazy auction dynamics happen where people are going to have to spend considerably more. Like when we started NCFF, or when I started, it was 2016, so that was the Carson Wentz, Jared Goff year, and I don't think anyone was excited about any of those players. And I remember the quarterback prices going kind of through the roof in that format. So like those years will be thinner. We'll also see probably a little bit of an elongation if teams are smart with how they handle the freshmen that came in this year. Colin, who's Miami, Ohio, asked in chat, would you start redshirting every freshman and then pulling it only when needed? So how do you guys anticipating handling the freshmen that you guys got?
You go first, Lewis.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think I've talked about this. I mean, at least with Brian. So I'll be quick because I think it's something that we touched up on, and when we talked strategy and maybe even bylaws before the auction. I always redshirt, with the exception. I think I blew my first redshirt in NCFF this year with Justin Herbert, and that was like. My other quarterback was Minshew. He was not playing some weeks, and I had a realistic shot at winning a national championship. Even though my team was probably, of the playoff teams, probably the weakest, I still had a realistic chance at getting into that playoff picture for a national championship. And so I burnt Justin Herbert. I don't regret it, but it's one of those, like, damn, it would be nice to have another year of Justin Herbert, but at the same time, I have Tua there as well, so I redshirted Tua. So I was probably in a better position than I think most teams would be. Like if I had no other quarterback and my team wasn't like, I'm 100% not playing Justin Herbert last year. So this year, again, I don't have any top end. I don't know. I haven't followed much rankings or any of that stuff in terms of where they have these guys. I would say my best rookie is probably, I don't know, Nico Collins or Dwayne Eskridge type players. I mean, I don't think that the Brown dude in Washington, like those are probably the best rookies that I have. They're not going to play anyways, so I'm 100% redshirting them. But yeah, I especially in this format out of the gate, I think it would be silly to not redshirt any freshman that you got, unless you have a guy like the only ones that I could see burning the red shirt on just because they would probably graduate early if they have a top season would be like a Najee Harris or something like that. So if you have a guy that you think could win an award as a rookie, then I'm probably playing him. But other than that, I am most likely stashing.
Yeah, I think the only players you don't like redshirt, in my experience, is the running backs, because they're really playing for one contract anyway. But if you have like a really top end guy and you have enough depth, you just redshirt everybody. It doesn't even matter. I think having a fifth year of someone is better than having just the first 4 years. So usually their freshman year, they're not doing too much as a rookie.
Yeah, I'll chime in with this point because my team, and I put it up on the screen. My team is incredibly young. I have 14.
Bad? Oh.
They're going to be bad too, but they're going to be incredibly young. I have 14 freshmen this year on my team, so almost half my roster is freshmen. And my strategy when I came into this was, I wanted to get 2 young quarterbacks, and I wanted to get as many young wide receivers that I felt were going to be good, and I was going to pretty much punt the running back position. And my idea was that I wanted to get the 2 positions that probably have a higher fifth year on them, but also have like the longevity of like, I might not be good season 1, but season 2 and 3, I'm building on something instead of trying to fix holes. I'll still have holes, but I won't feel like they're needs. They'll just be like builds on things. So I'm probably going to redshirt everyone because I might as well just roll the dice, see if I get that fifth year. I am a bit concerned about players like Jamar Chase and Trevor Lawrence and Jalen Waddle, where if they do really well their sophomore year or junior year, I might have a higher expense to make than what they're going to be giving me. So I think it's interesting how that dynamic's going to play out, the thought of them early declaring, and how do you kind of juggle that production question. So I think those are all interesting elements. I do agree that with Lewis, that if the only time I'm ever going to probably burn a freshman's red shirt in the middle of the season is if I'm on the precipice of competing for something. And I have to be like, there's no other options on the table. Like, I don't have a senior that can do it, or I have an injury, or the freshman's just blowing up and I need some extra oomph to get me over for the division or conference or whatever. But otherwise, I'm going to sit pat and roll with my decision that I have at the beginning of the year. So I think that's an interesting dynamic that people are going to question and have a lot more familiarity with after a season of doing it. Another question we got from Colin was, worst teams short-term, long-term, best teams short-term, long-term? This is kind of leading into the question of, like, who do we think is going to be good this year and who do we think is setting themselves up for maybe not being good this year but in future seasons. I don't know if that's something you can just pick out of a hat. It seems like we got 100 teams. It's really hard to know where teams sit at this moment.
I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't have a full grasp on, like, the entire league, but I mean, I know this is Colin from Minor. So, I mean, I could probably hint on Minor of who probably did really well early on, for year one, maybe year two, who's probably got a better idea, better chance in years 3 and 4 and beyond, and then who's just kind of really just fucked in general. So if that's something he wants, I could probably lend some insight to that super, super quickly. But as far as doing that over the whole course of the league, it's a little hard to do. Somebody asked me a question too the other day. I'm trying to think of who it was. And then Brian followed up in chat, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Brian, and, you basically answered the question for him." I'll have to go find my phone and look and see what that was, but it was one of those things I kind of basically answered with, like, yeah, there's some truth to it, but, like, it'll be hard for you to fully understand until you go through it. It was in regards to scheduling. It'll be hard for you to identify who's good and who's not. Right off the bat, like, you almost have to let it go for a year or two and let people settle in, so that you could see who, might necessarily just have lucked into a really good roster in the auction, who can actually build a roster so that the team's good by the time you play them. Like, all of that stuff it is kind of hard to piece together this quickly out of the auction. But I mean, I could do Minor really quick if that's something that he wanted to break down a Minor.
Yeah, give us the cliff notes. What's going to happen in Minor this year?
Hawaii's probably the worst setup team. I think they've got some good pieces, but Brian kind of hit on. You need to have a top. Well, I don't know if "needs" the right word, but if you don't have a top end quarterback, you need to have the best guys at everywhere else. Like, you need to have a solid 7 that are top probably 5 at their position, like all 7 of them. So the team's really got some nice guys, but Daniel Jones is a quarterback. Saquon Barkley, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Noah Fant, Dallas Goedert, and Terry McLaurin. So it's a really good kind of starting lineup. The problem is there's no depth here. So when Saquon Barkley leaves and Dallas Goedert leaves, and if somebody gets hurt, like, this is a team that did not look towards next year at all. There are no freshmen. There are very little sophomores. This is a team that is going to be really, really hard to fix. So that's probably the worst all-around team. Even though they have some really good players, that's probably, I would say, worst overall out of Minor. Some of the teams that did really, really good for early on would be like Fresno State. I really liked that team with a Kyler Murray, a Jonathan Taylor, maybe a Michael Carter fits into a role there, but then you've got like Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, Brandon Ayuk, Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst, Cortland Sutton. It's a really, really solid team. Probably, I would say, it would depend on what happens with Kyler Murray, if you can get a second year out of him. Or not.
I think he gets.
It's probably a team.
I think he gets a second year out of him. So this is something I'll mention because this is relevant for this discussion too. Is the player awards for this season are different than like what's going to happen in future years, because the likelihood Kyler Murray, his copy of Kyler Murray, like outproduces the other 12 seems.
Oh, because he's in minor. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I also think like I tried to think about this rationale when it comes to like my strategy too. When it comes to player awards, this season there's going to be probably only 3 players that walk for early declares, because of how we wrote the rules. That the only players that walk off of one award is the national awards. There's only 3 players that are going to win, 3 copies of a player that are going to win that award this season. So you're kind of hedging your bets this year if you're going to actually have a player leave after they win that award. It's probably going to be pretty low. And then even if you get like a junior winning a conference level award, you get him for next year and then you don't care. So I think that's going to be something that'll probably be something worth noting for some of these things, like some of the strategy. I don't know if he thought about that at all or had even the slightest idea that that's how it's going to work out, but I think he's safe with those things. Doesn't mean it could go wrong. Like his Kyler Murray copy could carry him to like, I don't know, 10 wins, but he's got enough depth here where I wouldn't think that would happen, where his Kyler Murray's just carrying him, because he's got a lot of really good pieces. So yeah.
Right. And then I think Nevada did very well. Another team that's probably, I don't know if I would extend Nevada into that second year of being really good. I think Nevada's a contender this year. And then has some really obvious holes moving forward. But this is a team that's going to start Lamar Jackson, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Michael Gallup, DK Metcalf, Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, and then they've got some decisions whether they're going to play like a Devontae Smith and some other guys there. But that was a lineup for this year that I really liked. And then they've got some pieces that, you know, barring injuries or something, you know, a couple bounces this way or that way, they've got some guys that could plug in and play, like a Jeffrey Wilson, Anthony Miller, or some other guys like that. So I like Nevada as well. I'm trying to think of, there was maybe one other team that I thought kind of in minor that put themselves out in front. I can't remember who it was. It definitely was not Kent State, I can tell you that. And then some other teams that I don't think had much of a plan. I'm not overly impressed with what...
Our little trio of Ball State, Bowling Green, and Toledo are an interesting comment to make. I think they were all really aggressive, and I don't know if they made, like, the most sound decisions. I don't know, you tell me. But
yeah, I would throw Ohio into that category as well. Ohio Bobcats. Those guys were kind of my, like, they threw their money around with what didn't seem like much of a plan. They won some good players because they were willing to throw money around, but there was no real plan to it. I think Ohio maybe did some focusing on more rookies, more freshmen, but they spent a lot. I mean, this was the team that spent $80 on Kyle Pitts, and it was just absurd. And they went down the line. I think their Kadarius Toney copy is the most expensive, not anywhere close to anywhere else's. They paid, where the hell is it? Yeah. $42 for Kadarius Toney. So this is a team where, if you look at that, I mean, that's $120 between two players that aren't top tier players in the format right now. I mean, they're not. So I mean, it's a $120 could have taken this team somewhere else completely different. It would look completely different. So those were some teams just like that threw some money around. The teams that I think were more patient. I think Colin wants me to tell him that he did really good being patient. I obviously was patient in the draft, and then San Jose State.
Trey.
Those were the three that kind of just let things unfold and pick up the scraps. I think Miami got some good players. I'm not like overly enthusiastic about it though. I think a lot of the better guys that he has are on junior or senior deals, like DJ Shark, AJ Brown. Trying to think of who else he has.
Nicole, he's got Lazard, Pittman, Irv Johnson,
Yeah.
Irv Smith.
But the one thing he does have is he got some younger guys like Trey Lance. That should be a red shirt, I would imagine. So play Drew Lock, let Trey Lance sit. You don't have to worry about quarterback. That's at least off the board. I really like Trey Sermon. Not for this year, probably for 2 or 3 years down the road. So I think that's also an easy red shirt. So I think he's got some pieces. I would have liked him to grab some more rookie wide receivers instead of what he's got compiled here. But I like those pieces. And then San Jose State, I talked to him a little bit throughout the process. I was like, would you do this approach again? Like, do you think it worked? Like, what are your thoughts? I'm not really quite sure. He got a couple guys, Chase Claypool, Brandon Ayuk.
Looks like he did what I did, really young.
Yeah, he went super, super young, grabbed some other guys that I think were value, but I think he has more holes than what he would have liked coming out of this. He's got quarterback nailed down pretty solid with Fields and Jones, but there's not there's not anything that I'd be overly enthusiastic about
And
at running back.
Trey, if you see this, call me up about scheduling a game. We just seem to have the whole redshirt thing down, and we can at least try to gamble on which one of us wins $1. So call me up. We'll schedule.
But yeah, so it's an interesting team, and it was also the fact that he had money left at the end, so like he had the option to win guys that would have added something,
value,
but instead he took shots at like a Hunter Long, Brevin Jordan, and the dude out of Minnesota whose name I don't even know, Smith Marset or something like there were just a lot of those guys where, like, again, I get it, like they're rookies, but just because they have an R on there, it doesn't mean that they're rosterable. So I think a lot of these guys are even going to be cuts next year. I'm not entirely sure how we'll see cutting go because the rosters are a little bit bigger here than NCFF, but that's the other thing that I obviously filled out the 30, but I kind of had a plan. I didn't expect everybody else to kind of fill out the 30 because now if you don't have enough guys graduating in order to have room to participate in the auction next year, you're going to have to drop some guys, and so I think that'll be interesting as well because at least I know that I end up like loving the guys that I have, and I don't want to cut them or give them away. So it's always an interesting factor. But I was kind of shocked by. Usually, like I like to leave some wiggle room. Maybe like if it's a 30 man roster limit, maybe I go to like 27 or whatever. I was surprised that nearly everybody that could went to the full 30.
Yeah, I think everyone did. Let's switch gears from minor. Jake, do you think any teams from your neck of the woods are set up for obvious like rebuilds next year or set up well for the long term? I know we've talked about Duke a little bit, your own team. I don't know if we want to mention Wes and what he did or...
Yeah, let's do the 16-year-old. Let's see what his team's like. I think he's kind of went in between. I think his team looks okay to he's gonna have Myles Gaskin, I guess, and DeAndre Swift as his starters. Seems like he's got a lot of freshmen on his team. but he got Lamar Jackson as a senior for this year. I'm not sure he has, like, I don't know if he just got him because he pricing for us and just ended up with him. Because his team seems to be more for like a long-term kind of build for the future. But he's got the senior Lamar Jackson. But overall, he did okay. I don't know about his running backs. I don't know any of those names right there. Those freshmen. I know Khalil Herbert and Jarrett Patterson. But let's see. Trey Sermon will be good. So we'll see how he goes. Yeah, Duke Blue Devils are going to be a one-year wonder. We'll see how they do this year. They're going to have a lot of holes to fill. Wake Forest, they're not filled out yet. They still only have what is it, like 21 players? They have a good team though. I like their team. They got Etienne and Najee Harris and Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, so they're all going to be back next year.
It's
His
it seems like a
it's
glass
weird.
cannon kind of approach.
Yeah, he's got no depth, but it'll be interesting to see how well that team goes. I mean, I think he'll be a top contender if he doesn't redshirt his running backs, but he can't right now because I don't think he has enough running backs to start. So
He would if he played just Singletary. I don't advise it.
oh, it's 1 to 3, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's 1 to 3. So he'd
You
have
could do
enough,
that.
but you lose Devin Singletary or he sucks. So
Yeah.
I imagine he plays him based on the composition of his team. But yeah, that team looks really good. Just wow, anything goes wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Just one team I just didn't know what they were doing. I think maybe it was UConn. Let's see. They have a pretty good team. UConn came in late. They were like, I think they didn't do anything for like 3 days, right?
Yeah, I was
And then
trying to track his ass down.
came in at the end. He got a few players, or he's got a lineup, and I think it'll be okay. They were scary because I didn't see them on the board for a few days, and we all thought they were gone, and you would have to step in, but they ended up getting a decent roster. Virginia Tech looks okay. They look good this year. They've got Justin Herbert, which he'll be good for the next few years. Saquon's a 1 year. Hopefully he stays or like doesn't get hurt again. Nick Chubb. You got Josh Jacobs. Their wide receivers they got Calvin Ridley, so they'll be looking for wide receiver help next year. I don't know if they have anything other than Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore,
They got
CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, so it'll be fun to see this year and what they have to do next year to retool to be a contender. At least they don't have to get a quarterback. They're going to need another quarterback, but they won't have to spend a lot of money on like a top tier one, hopefully.
Yeah.
Florida State, they
I think
only
North
have.
Carolina's decent. Sorry, I was just flipping.
Oh yeah,
through teams
UNC.
real quick.
Yeah, let me see. Let's go there.
I think they're at least a decent starting lineup. I don't know about depth, but
Yeah, they don't have
they
much
look like a
depth,
team that's probably going to score 100 points a week at least for this year.
Oh yeah.
Well, he
They're
looks like
looking
he's
good.
starting all of his. He's gonna have to start all of his rookie wide receivers if he's gonna want to do anything. Like he's gonna have to play
North
Waddle.
Carolina?
Yeah, Waddle, Elijah Moore,
Yeah.
Jamar.
Why wouldn't you play? Yeah, I guess you're right.
Okay. I mean,
All he's
I
got
guess
is
he can play
Moody.
Darnell Moody.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'm looking at the wrong team.
Maybe you're looking at North Carolina State.
Oh, you're looking at NC State. He's a
Yeah,
great team.
yeah,
The
yeah.
best
I'm looking
team.
at NC State. Is that you? Okay, so
Yeah,
so I'm
that's
looking
me.
at your team. I'm on North Carolina State. That's my fault.
Yeah,
I can't read.
so this is the number 1 overall team, I think. Not much to say here. Just we got everything. We've got no. I didn't go freshmen or seniors really because I thought they'd be overpriced. So I got a few seniors in the wide receiver department. Yeah, I already talked about it, so I don't want to keep talking about how great my team is.
Yeah.
Unlike
North Carolina. since I said the wrong team, just looking, North Carolina does have so. For those of you that haven't yet, you can kind of get on and submit your lineup, or at least an idea of what your lineup's going to be to give you an idea of how many points you're going to score. So North Carolina's already actually submitted their week 1 lineup, and again, obviously this can change. But they're doing exactly what you guys said. Jamar Chase is in that starting lineup. Jalen Waddle, paired with Mooney, Scott Miller, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Chase Edmonds, and Justin Herbert for a grand total of 86 points. So that's what they've got in there starting. So that's kind of interesting, and that gives you an idea of maybe the route teams are thinking. So that's where I'm scrolling through right now to look, but. Virginia Tech's another one that's in the ACC that's projected to score 110 points a week. Justin Herbert, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, and Mark Andrews. That might be a national championship roster if everything goes well. Because I think somebody said, who's got a better 4? This is a better 4 plus another better 4. So there's just like 8 really solid guys here for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, they have a lot of seniors and juniors, so
they're going to be good for this year. I think them and Duke will be battling it out. I don't know if they're in the same division. I can't remember.
Yes, they are.
So we'll see who comes out of the other end. I think, let me see. Boston College, I don't know. They have a pretty decent team. I think they kind of leveled out. The way you were saying about the ACC, we were kind of a little more conservative, so a lot of people kind of got players that they could start.
It seemed like you guys are also pretty buddy watching the chat. Like I think there were a few times where people stepped on each other's toes, but I think mostly you guys kind of just stayed out of each other's way for the most part. There wasn't like I think I saw in a few divisions like Big 12 had a few inflammatory comments toward each other where someone bid him up like at the last 5 minutes and reset him, and that irked a few people. I think SEC had some really good. They're not in here. They're not in this to talk about it, but I would love to talk about the SEC. Just because people would get upset if we didn't.
I should talk about Boston College real quick. And they're
all right. Talk about
Jerry Jeudy.
Okay,
do they have Jerry Jeudy?
I don't know.
Is it them? Let's see. I think it's. Oh, maybe it was Wake Forest. No, it was Pitt. Freaking Pitt. They come in 3 minutes before I was gonna have Jeudy with my roster. He was the last little piece I needed. My team is great. It could have been better, but he had to bid. I think it was like 56. I don't know. The first copy went for less. Let's leave this. He won him for 50. So I had him at like 49. It was 3 minutes left. I was coming back. We had just driven like 6 hours. I was going to get my pictures taken, whatever. And he freaking bids it up. I get in the chat. I think you saw it. That was the one inflammatory comment that happened. I said I was livid. I wanted to add him and just scream at him, but
oh man,
yeah, that's the only thing.
That was a lot more. Wade got him for 39, and then he went for 50. That's crazy.
Yeah, I thought I'd get him for 49 because nobody wants to be the dumbass that paid more. But Pittsburgh, you're probably a cool guy, but I hate you right now.
All right, let me shift gears to the SEC because I think they were very interesting. There was a lot of hot-blooded tempers going on in the SEC, which was very fun to watch for that group. So this group, just to give some frame of reference, has a lot of people familiar with the format mixed in with a few others. I think they have the most out of any of the conferences where they had like 8 people that have played in the format before. So very different dynamic to what other conferences have, which I think most others had like 4 people that were familiar with the format. So SEC had 8, and they were kind of all at each other's throats at certain points in the auction. Joey going to battle with Corey, who is Eastern Carolina, and they were battling over certain players. And we had some really good, fun conversations going on in there. I think Florida and Alabama have a good rivalry started based on how they bid against each other. But I think they were all really aggressive. Maybe outside of Eastern Carolina and Kentucky, those two played it pretty conservative with their money and walked away with some pretty considerable depth, if I remember. But it was very fun to watch watch all of those guys. Ethan, who is Tennessee, was harping at people and making fun of them for how they were bidding, and it was probably the funnest chat to watch out of any of the conferences. Just
Didn't
to
like
see
the
how
ACC chat? Didn't like the
I saw where you guys were going with your chat, but it became pretty predictable after the first day.
Yeah, you're right. The OnlyFans chat.
Yeah, I don't know how many gifs of Jessica Alba's ass I saw in that chat, but it was probably 5 or 6 in a consecutive span.
Yeah, the
Um,
horny chat.
yeah, you guys are pretty crazy over there. But SEC is going to be interesting. I think Eastern Carolina is definitely, in my mind, one of the front runners out of that group. I think Kentucky's also really good. Texas A&M, I think, has also got a really good team. They got like Kyler Murray, Chubb, Gaskins, Pollard, Singletary, and then just some pretty hardy depth at wide receiver. So I think he'll be good. Let's check our boy Luigi. Luigi got Allen, Lawrence, so he'll be set at quarterback. He'll have to get another one, but he'll have a pretty good team. He's got Barkley, Chubb, Gus Edwards. So he looks like he's a little thin at running back. He has some depth pieces. And then a wide receiver, he's got Claypool, Jacoby Myers, Kadarius Toney, Cortland Sutton, Deebo Samuel. So he's got a variety of things. I don't think he's a front runner compared to some of these other guys, but I think he's going to have a decent team. I can't remember if he was price enforcing. Yeah, I can't remember if he was price enforcing all that much.
Oh wow!
In this group, because I think other teams were doing it just as much.
I think he did at the beginning until he got stuck with Irv Smith.
Oh yeah, $25. $25 Irv Smith.
$25
was the talk.
Yeah, so he was definitely doing it, and I think that once he got stuck with Irv Smith and then kind of settled down, I think he laid off. But he definitely got stuck with Irv Smith.
Yeah, he did.
Irv Smith as a price enforcing.
Irv Smith was talked about a lot at the beginning of that auction.
It's rough.
His roster's not bad. I mean, he's set his lineup, so he's another one that's projected over 100 points. Allen, Barkley, Chubb, Harris, Claypool, Myers, Samuel, and Sutton. Again, I don't know how consistently he goes over 100 because you're counting on guys like Jacoby Myers in the starting lineup. Mm-hmm. But it should be a team that probably wins more games than loses. He's probably going to win more games than Joey. I think I played Joey. We scheduled for week 1. I'm not entirely sure. I think we did. And so I think Joey's got a little bit of a different team. He's also starting, at least the lineup that he set has Javonte Williams in it, which I think is an interesting move for Joey. He knows better. I'm not quite sure.
He's going to need some help at wide receiver. He's really just got Justin Jefferson and Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things where I was kind of concerned.
But I know talking with Joey's strategy this time around was more to stack. He wanted to try the stack idea where he was getting a bunch of Philadelphia Eagles players. Yeah, and Andy mentioned this in chat. He said Joey focused on team stacking. You can tell he plays best ball. Which he does. He does play a lot of best ball. So he wanted to stack players, and he stacked a lot of Patriots and Eagles. So he's got Jalen Reagor, Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders. So he doesn't expect to get to the conference championship, but if he did, for some reason, he would probably not win the conference championship because he's got so many Eagles players. So, yeah, I think this group was very interesting. Missouri,
yeah, that's a weird strategy.
It is a very weird strategy for this format, but we'll see what
happens. I don't
know why.
Did he pick the Eagles for a reason, or did he just was Jalen Hurts' first player he won, and then he went from there?
No, I think he liked Jalen Hurts' upside, being a rushing quarterback, and then I think it kind of blended into those other players. I don't know what his opinion is of Devonta Smith, but I think he likes Reagor, and Miles Sanders is kind of like he's the real guy there or not kind of idea.
There's no Kenneth Gainwell on this roster. That's a little frightening.
But
yeah, that's a weird setup. I've not seen. I mean, I've known Ross to stack, but he stacks the backup quarterbacks. Like, he doesn't go out and get every single eligible target for the quarterback. So that's a weird strategy that I'm not sure. Like, if you had the ability to add and drop and trade, yeah, maybe. But for something there's not going to be any types of way to add people between now and the draft. I'm not sure. Like, what are you going to do next year? Do the same thing? Only draft Eagles and Patriots? Because if it is, it's something that people are going to catch on to, and you won't win a single one.
Well,
or you'll win them and they'll be
I think
$100 a piece.
I think he's testing it, so we'll see what happens with it. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think another team in the SEC that's going to be a really team that's in contention this year, but next year is going to look real rough is Auburn. They got Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Saquon, James Robinson. They got AJ Brown, Metcalf. Then they got a lot of other depth. Oh, they got Chark too, and Andrews.
Chark, James Robinson. Yeah,
they're gonna have some good players this year, but next year is gonna be kind of you're gonna be kind of pulling your collar and saying, "Oh gosh, what do we do with the squad?" So we'll see what happens with them. They'll be probably in the front running position. I think teams like Missouri, Robbie with Arkansas will be kind of in the middle to maybe at the lower end. Arkansas could compete for something if Burrow. Well, he's got Lamar Jackson too. So yeah, those guys could play well. I think Tennessee's a very light team, but they have concentrated their efforts on having another. They're kind of like Wake Forest with kind of a glass cannon kind of thing, where they got Burrow, Akers, Taylor, Ayuk, McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, pretty much as their starting lineup. So they'll score a bunch of points, but what happens when bye weeks start happening will be kind of interesting. So, I think.
Sorry, I was going to say something else. Go ahead.
I was just going to shift gears to some of the other conferences that we haven't really talked about to hopefully kind of wrap this up.
Yeah, I was looking at the Big 12. I don't know if you want to go there next, but that was the one I had put up. And I also, because I was scrolling through, I want to just quick public safety announcement to Central Michigan. Please don't start the players you have in your starting lineup. Your team is not good, will not be good. And burning Lawrence, Chase, Tooney, Waddle, and Pitts just to score 65 points a week is not the best solution. I would pack it in and look to next year. Anyways, back to the Big 12.
All right.
I was trying to think of who.
So let me just start by saying this. This was probably the most aggressive conference out there. Mind you, not counting minor because they're their own unique problem of a conference. But Big 12 had routinely the higher average when it came to the price of players, and they were aggressive from the onset to the point where the bottom, I think, really fell out for them with prices, which is very interesting. I think they had the highest copy of Justin Herbert in the auction. Let's see, what did Texas pay for him? Yeah, he paid $95 for Justin Herbert, so I think that was the closest player to $100 in the entire auction. And I think the next copy went for $81, so both copies of Herbert were north of $80, and one was $95. So clearly they were very aggressive. Which is funny when I say that, because one of the people that was commenting on how aggressive the prices were and making comment was Texas, and they were the one that paid the most for Justin Herbert. So they all did this to themselves, and they didn't even have Army for like the first day in their auction, and Marshall had to be replaced. So they were aggressive even without having really those two guys the first day in there. So they had a very interesting auction. I think the only team that really waited was Bobby in West Virginia. He kind of sat back and let everyone spend their money and put together a team that had Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, Trey Lance, all at his quarterback position. And I don't think he spent too much for Justin Fields. I think he maybe got one of the better deals for him. Yeah, he only paid $37 for Justin Fields. My God.
Wow.
Woo!
Yeah, he'll be good next. He's got a lot of freshmen. I like how he built his team.
Yeah, I think West Virginia is one of my favorite auctions. He's got a lot of freshmen, so he might not be good this year, but Jesus, this team's going to probably be in a better place than a lot of other Big 12 teams.
Yeah, it's got a good upward trajectory outside of running back. But again, when you do something like this, if you get some of those wide receivers to hit, we already know quarterbacks is pretty much shirt up. You just take the two best running backs next year and you're ready to go. Whoever they are, you just pay. And so I like this. Again, there were a couple teams that did this in minor with the 3 quarterback stuff. I get that there's value there, but like $37 could have gotten you a worthwhile rookie running back. That puts you maybe in that much better of a spot. But yeah, no, I really like it. They kind of took a similar approach to, I think, like what I did, but they got better players, if that makes sense. They're obviously more there because they're not in the minor conference, but I really like that approach. We talked about Baylor, so I don't think we need to talk about them. I'm trying to think of who the other team was that I really, really liked. I was scrolling through here.
I think
we talked about the depth. I'm shocked that like Iowa State and Kansas didn't fill out their rosters. That's a little weird to me.
So let's talk about Kansas. I don't know why you didn't fill out his roster yet, but Kansas was incredibly aggressive in this auction to the point where I think he spent some absurd amount on T.J. Hawkinson, and he kept spending money, and he knew he wasn't supposed to. He spent $25, but he ended up paying a lot more for more tight ends than what you feasibly should. That's not the right guy.
Wow, UCLA spent 42 on TJ.
Yeah, it's a lot. That was a lot over there. But I think that instance was there was no one left, and so they had a bunch of money and they needed to spend it. But he ended up paying for Cole Kmet, Hayden Hurst, Noah Fant was another one that I think Kansas spent a lot, and that's why we refer to him as tight end U, because he spent $18 on Noah Fant, he spent $25 on Hawkinson, and I think there just were better places to spend the money, and he was aggressive for like Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, so I think he kind of caught himself a bit with that. So we'll see what happens with that team. I think teams like Cincinnati are a bit of a glass cannon to approach. Kansas State, our boy Joe Baker, he put together, I think, a halfway decent squad. We'll see what he does with Fields and Baker Mayfield, if he decides to play Fields or just roll with Baker. But he's a little lighter, has some positional players that'll probably add some depth, like Laviska, hopefully is useful in Urban Meyer's scheme. Lee Wibble, who did TCU as a halfway decent team with Dobbins, James Robinson, Damian Harris, and then he's got Chark, Gallup, CeeDee Lamb. MVS, I think, is not a player that we mentioned a lot, but could be a really interesting depth, like wide receiver 4 in this format, just like some of the tight ends could be like wide receiver 4 spots that are beneficial. So those types of players, I think, kind of ended up being a value in this auction. I don't know if you guys saw that, but they were a value in ours where they were going for like cheapo dollars. Same with like Alan Lazard type players that'll be interesting spot fills and depth pieces in this format. So they'll be interesting players for sure. Another team that was pretty good in the Big 12 was, I think, Oklahoma State's going to be pretty interesting. They got James Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Mecole, Kirk. Christian Kirk's not that great anymore. Terry McLaurin, Courtland Sutton. So I think Big 12 is going to be an interesting play. The last conference we haven't really talked too much about, but was interesting was...
I don't think there's... And I'll say this real quick. I don't think there's any, like, overly crazy, other than Baylor, I don't think there's any, like, overly crazy team that I would put in here as, like, in a national championship or playoff or a division race type of a deal. I think all these other teams are probably like middle of the pack. Like we talked about some of them. I'd throw Houston into that middle of the road, like pretty somewhat decent, maybe 5-6 players, but then 7-8 and 9 are a little shaky. But like you said, they did this to themselves. I'm clicking on some of these prices and some of them are hilarious. I am actually quite enjoying this. I probably would enjoy being in this division. I'm writing that down, so if I do ever jump up, Big 12.
Andy's in the chat, and I know Andy's friends with SMU. Rob, I don't know if Andy had talked to Rob about his, but he ended up having, I think, a pretty halfway decent group too. But I wonder if Andy heard any comments from Rob about how Big 12's auction was going. And while I wait to see if he answers, we'll just make a segue to Pac-12. Pac-12, just like Big 12, was an anomaly in their own right for Power 5. They were the most conservative with their money, to the point where near the end of the auction, when everyone else... oh, yeah, Andy, you can hop on this call. Please feel free to hop on Discord and give a comment. But Pac-12 was very conservative with their money. They were aggressive to some degree, but then some teams just saved their money to the point that they ended up having really big bidding wars near the end of the auction when the talent was starting to dry up. So I don't know if he hopped on yet, but
Yeah, he's right here.
yep. Andy, so if you have any comments about Big 12 from Rob's perspective, feel free to give it chime.
Hey there, just figuring out my audio right now. So yeah, chatting with Rob during this, the whole auction, like we chatted back and forth. That's why our teams kind of ended up looking fairly similar, actually. But yeah, he was just talking about day one being insane, and he just kind of sat back and then ended up overpaying for things he didn't want to overpay for. I remember he was like particularly upset about what he paid for Gibson, for example. But overall, it just sounded like, you know, there was chaos, and this was the conference that a couple people had to be replaced, right?
Oh my god, yeah. Jesus. That was another the wrinkle with this group. They had so many issues day one where we had to replace 2 people. So the fact that they were... And Lewis, you can make a comment on this guy, because he was something else. I don't know if English was a second language, which I don't give a fault for, because we have other people in this league that have English as a second language kind of thing, and they're doing just fine.
No, this dude is a fucking idiot. I've never seen a dumber Sorry, I was muted and I've been talking about this. I've never seen a dumber. I've been playing fantasy in a dynasty perspective now probably 8 years, and which is not long. Some of these other people, but in the 8 years I've been here, I've seen a lot of stupid people and a lot of stupid things. I've never seen anything more dumb than that dude. He had messaged me and asked when we were doing the IDP part of the draft. I about lost my shit. I told Brian immediately to replace that dude, and Brian gave him a chance, like maybe 5 more hours, and then was like, "You're right, he's gone." I've never seen anything dumb, like more dumb in my life.
Kidding?
No.
No, the guy had him and his brother were in this, and they just couldn't figure out how to get to the auction. He didn't realize he was bidding on players that he had bid on. He didn't know what he was doing or how to communicate this to his brother, which I tried to message his brother himself. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, I tried to do this in good faith. There's a bunch of people in here that have never done this before, but this guy has been just impossible to deal with. So I booted him. We got Jeff Huntley from NCFF in here, which I'm really grateful for him because he took over Army. And then I think his name is Jay. Jay. Thank God for Jay. Jay had been messaging me on Reddit about filling a spot, and he was gracious enough to wait to see if Fallout from this was going to be what it was, and then took over and actually put a halfway decent Marshall team together. So those 2 guys I'm really grateful for coming into the league and doing what they did, because that was impossible. I had to fix so many bids after we kicked Army, because he had, right before we decided to go our separate ways, he had just gone on a spree and spent a bunch of money unknowingly. So that was very frustrating.
Oh my God.
So I'm appreciative to Big 12 for being as patient but also pretty aggressive in their own capacity for everything that was transpiring with that whole auction at the beginning. So they were very interesting. They didn't speak much during the auction. I think it's because they have a lot of newbies and not a lot of people that are familiar with each other. But they were also the most aggressive, which was very interesting to watch for. And as I mentioned about Pac-12, they were the most conservative out of any of them. They had a big bidding war near the end. I think we've talked about them before, but like teams like Colorado State were incredibly senior heavy, where they got teams like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson on the same squad, Chubb, Dobbins, Javonte Williams, which I imagine he's going to play this year, Chark, all these, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley. So he's got a solid starting lineup. And I think those guys are going to be incredibly aggressive and trying to compete. I think our boy Matt, who is at a wedding today, did he get
Yeah,
Paris?
he did pretty well.
He did pretty well.
At least
He
in the
was-
beginning, he did. Colorado
Yeah, we were
State, by the way,
messaging the
is
whole time.
projected 110 week 1, which is the most of anybody that's set a lineup so far. So Colorado State, technically, on paper,
Number one.
number one so far. Yeah, I mean 110 points for week 1
Wow.
with Jackson, Chubb, Dobbins, Robinson, Chark, Hardman, Moore, and Ridley.
Wow. Yeah, you guys put together a good. He's got Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson.
And they had
Which
some
is nice.
interesting discussions in the chat about Colorado State. I think Oregon State was really questioning him to almost some of a degree that I think prickled some feathers, but I think it was just a misunderstanding from a text standpoint and understanding the context. But people were wondering, like, okay, what does Colorado State do from next year? Like, is this the viable strategy? And Larry, or LD in the chat, is very well aware of what he's doing and just wants to, I think, see what happens. He wants to try for it all, and I think he's well accepting that his team isn't going to be nearly as good next year. So he's very well aware of what he's done, and we'll see what happens, because if he wins it all, and he's paid for himself to make a new team
it doesn't
for
matter.
the next like 4 or 5 years, maybe well longer, because you win like $600 to $900. So
Yeah, as long as you win, doesn't matter what you did.
Yep, doesn't.
Do whatever you
So
want after.
their Big 12 or Pac-12 is interesting. I think other teams that did pretty well out of this group. We mentioned our boy Matt. I think he probably put his best team together, because his FCS team in the
It's rough.
is rough, and glad to see he learned from his mistakes.
Yeah, we were messaging a lot. I think you could see a lot of similarities, like Henry Ruggs, Jalen Rager. I think he was getting a little frustrated towards the end because everybody had their money left over, so he was trying to fill out some depth, and he had to pay a little more than he wanted to for a few players. He couldn't get some players that he wanted. I think maybe Judy was one of them. I can't remember.
I think he wanted.
But, yeah.
I think him and USC were the last bidders. Yep. So they were the last bidders for Najee Harris, and Najee
That's what it
Harris
was,
went
yeah.
for $89, because those two just kept bidding back and forth, because there was no other real running backs left on the market for them to really compete for. So I think that was one of the very interesting components. I think we mentioned it before, but UCLA, I think, got like a $42 TJ Hawkinson copy, which is by far the most. So they had definitely
crazy.
bidding wars near the end of their auction, because they definitely had hoarded money. Certain teams hoarded money. And we'll see how well that pans out for them, because, it's all relative. So if the auction is shifting where everyone's saving money, then the deals are all in the upfront, like people not paying for the premium prices for those first copy players and paying more for the second. So it definitely happened where that inverse had shifted, which is a question I'm very interested in, and how things happen from next year. Like with the second copy, do teams start like saving money and then the first copies become cheaper? Or are we always going to see like the second copies be the more cheap option? I don't know if you guys have any takes on that piece.
I think it's depending on the conference, because I know my conference was a little different. I already talked about it. The first half was you got the deals on the front end, or the second copy, and then the back end you'd get the deals on the first copy. But I think it's just going to depend on which conference goes where. The Pac-12 will probably do an opposite approach, because a lot of those people that waited kind of didn't get screwed over, but they didn't get what they wanted to out of it. So maybe some of them switch over and it kind of balances out and kind of goes back. But I think it'll still probably be on average the second copy going for a little bit less.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it depends on activity too. I mean, that's the other.
Yeah.
You might be able to sneak a couple guys off the board real quick if you get a high enough proxy on them and they don't get reset and stuff like that. But I would almost think that in all instances the first copy is going to cost more than the second one. Kind of everybody goes, okay, the first one went for this, I can't pay more than that, essentially, unless it was a stupid good deal. The only places I would see that is kind of where you see at the end of the draft. And again, it depends on how players get nominated. So there's some strategy to that, and I hope everybody's caught on to that strategy. So that if you keep people to the end, and there's only a couple people left with money, what happens is your Kadarius Toney's go for $40, your whoever you guys were just talking about, Najee Harris, going back and forth for $89. Those prices, those types of players will, at the very end of auctions will go more than the first copy, but I would say almost 85-90% of the first copies are going to be more expensive than the second.
Yeah.
I think I agree with Jake on it's mostly it depends on a conference level, but I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I know, Brian, I was messaging you about this during our Big Ten auction, and like I kind of joked by throwing a crappy paint version of a graph into chat earlier, but that was kind of how I felt about it. Is that there was just like a middle section of the value where copy 2s were more expensive, but it started out with copy 1s being more expensive than copy 2s, and then it switched in the middle, and then at the end I think it kind of just bottomed out to, until everything's zero. But it felt like there was like a sweet middle section that was just kind of, and I don't have any data on this, it was just a total feel-based thing, but it felt like the middle section copy 2s were going for more because people were like, oh, this is where the deals are, and now I need to start spending here, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, yeah, I made that point earlier. Andy was with like Chance in Michigan, who made that comment like, when are the deals going to happen with Big Ten? And we just kind of kept spending, which I think is kind of the counter when how big the number of teams are is, I think, an interesting wrinkle where we had teams who had used up, you were including one of them, who had used up a vast majority of their budget. And I think Penn State is a great example of this. They just kind of kept spending. They just kind of kept throwing money at players until like you literally got them out of the auction and they couldn't spend anymore. So they would keep putting money at the players, and the deals wouldn't really happen until you like got them out of there. And I think Ohio State was another one where they spent a lot of money in the upfront, and they would just keep throwing money at it. So either the teams would have to let them get that player and then essentially get out of the auction, or just keep kind of spending up until almost the cost of that copy 1, which I think what we saw a few times in Big Ten at least.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned like my spending habit. So what I did, kind of by accident, was I didn't really come in with a plan, and so I ended up just price enforcing until I got a guy on something that I like vaguely considered a decent deal, which as time told I kind of overspent on day one, but that live and learn, right? Mm-hmm. But so I ended up just like getting my core of 5 guys, realizing that I spent like 75% of my budget, and so I basically sat out for 3 days. Like I think you noticed that, Brian, that I just like kind of only like bid up when I thought there was like a good deal there, and if I didn't get it, it was fine, let them walk, and I just like sat out until whatever Wednesday or whatever.
Yep.
Right. That attitude was almost like, it's one of the things where I wish, and I think I talked about this when I first hopped on, and it was like there was like a refusal to let players off the board. It sounds like that was a thing in the Big Ten, but it also happened like in minor. Guys just refused to let, like, there were so many times where I was talking to Brian and I was like, yo, dude, somebody's, Hawaii's got $7 left and we're on like day 1 of the auction. You know what I mean? Like, there were so many instances where teams could have just like paid attention to the board, let that guy go off, and he's out with like 6 players. Like, that happened so many times. But what would happen is guys would be like hellbent. Like Ohio was hell-bent on getting Kyle Pitts at whatever, $82, I think was the final price. To where, like, you just kept resetting him, and that just makes everybody pay more, because then instead of letting that guy go off into the sunset and ending his auction, now he's got money again, he's going to throw it all at one player, and then you go after that player and reset it. Like, that happened it was like Groundhog Day in minor. I mean, I don't know how it was in Big Ten. It sounds like that's pretty similar. With the price, because I don't think there were too many deals. There were a couple deals in minor, like, don't get me wrong, but like nothing to write home about. Like, I thought there might have been 1 or 2 instances where I was gonna get I actually had 2 chances to get probably the best deals in minor on Mac Jones and Joe Burrow. Man, fucking Taylor messed that up for me. He reset Joe Burrow. I think I told Brian, I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna get Joe Burrow for like $30. And Taylor jacked him up to 40 whatever. I paid 45, I think. And then somebody else reset Mac Jones at the very last second. But it was like that refusal to like relax and just let things come off the board.
Big Ten was definitely
Just makes everybody cost more.
Yeah, at Big Ten, and again, I mentioned this way earlier in the stream, is that I definitely am one that is going to recycle the board with maybe not the intent of getting that player. I got burned on this one time, and it just screwed up my strategy. So much was Cam Akers. I saw that these prices for running backs were going, and I saw Cam Akers at $59, and I'm like, I'm just gonna put one more dollar on this Cam Akers, and if I get him, I'm hoping that the guy comes back quickly, just to have him sit on the board or recycle the board in the hopes that in another 12 hours someone's gonna take Cam Akers off my plate, and just kind of see if that money for the recycling or the running back market kind of cycles up, where they just keep spending a bit more and get more money out of the pool, was my hope. And we showed a little bit better discretion. I think Northwestern is one I'm going to have to watch out for in future auctions, where he was way more prone to let players come off the board, or he's price enforcing and was really happy that I took Cam Akers off his plate and then just went and used that money somewhere else. But we definitely, I think, at some points had trouble letting players off the board, because we were one of the ones that lagged behind. We had a really high average being spent on players, but we did not nearly have as many players coming off the board, which said to me that we were really slow at letting players come off. Either we were not nominating enough, or we were just kind of cycling the board a few times where we weren't able to get new players on, and people just kind of felt frustrated and were spending a bit more money on them, a dollar here or a dollar there. And I made that comment in chat, which I think Indiana was curious about, and he put together a good team too. I think we have a few good teams in Big Ten this year. So I imagine.
So not to pivot from the Big Ten, but something you said just intrigued me. So I don't want to pivot away from the Big Ten, because I don't think we let Andy finish talking about what teams he liked or whatever he was on here to talk about. But you were talking about the time frame in which you guys were letting players off the board. Do you think that was a understanding or lack of understanding or lack of use of the proxy bid? Because that's always something that I like to track when I'm doing an auction, like who's using proxy bid, who isn't, how does somebody bid. And I've shared with, I don't know what league, but I've shared with Brian before kind of how I bid. Like, I only really bid in $1, $5, and $10 increments when I'm bidding on players for various reasons, and I'm not going to go into that right now. But it was one of the things that I noticed, like, for the first couple of days, at least while the first copies were on the board, or some early second copies, like at least to me, there was a whole lot more usage of the proxy, and the proxy was a much higher number. Whereas, by the end of, day 3, 4, 5, there started to be maybe a lack of proxy bid altogether, at least in minor. So players started to cycle a little bit more there.
I don't.
And so I wanted your thoughts on that. If you thought that there was any kind of, just because it was really noticeable in minor, like the switch from there being set proxies to players literally started staying on the board way longer because of a lack of proxy, and it was like guys are getting reset over, like that, or teams were proxy bidding and then dropping the proxy bid down to like $1 or $2 above what the current bid was, and then guys were just getting reset because there was that antsiness on the board. Like, because there were a couple instances where a player was going to get one for 7 hours, and then guys just kept resetting them, but they were only being reset on like the $1 and $2 bids because the proxies were either non-existent or super low.
I don't think it was an example of us being unknown of the proxy system. I think almost every single one of the people in Big Ten knew how to use the proxy system. I didn't see many examples where we were doing ticky-tacky $1, because if you put a player like, I'm going to put Justin Fields as an example because I think it was a very apparent one, was the first copy of Justin Fields got put up on the board, and I think I put him up on the board. I put a proxy at $70, but I remember even the second copy got put up on the board, went almost instantly up to $80. and it's not like a ticky-tacky $1 here, $1 there kind of bid. They were like leaps in proxy bids, meaning that I think the Big Ten is savvy where they were understanding or at least looking at what other conferences were doing and presuming that we were going to act somewhat accordingly. I think also some of that happens where you have really aggressive teams. So I mentioned them before. I think Ohio State was really aggressive. Penn State is always aggressive. I mentioned in our chat, Andy, at one point, he's like, I'm not patient enough for this. I blew my money in like 5 players instantly, and they're good players. But he knows where his weaknesses are, and I've done a few auctions with him myself, and that's just how he operates every single time. He's very laser focused, spends the money to get his guys, and I think those are examples of those teams. But they're definitely really smart auction teams in the Big Ten, like Minnesota. Northwestern, I think, is much smarter at this than what I maybe, and this isn't a dig at him because I don't know him enough and how he auctions, but I think he's very smart when it comes to auctioning. I think Michigan's smart. I think Indiana's smart. Purdue is smart. I don't know. I think all of them were really smart.
What about me? Am I smart?
Well, you're not in Big Ten, so
Not in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
At one point, Brian messaged me and was like, "Holy fuck, what are you doing?" Because I think I took a completely different approach than what I normally do in any auction anywhere.
You were
but-
much more reserved, which was surprising. You got bailed out.
I
which
enjoyed
either
watching the board.
Roy-
And that was the other thing too, which I mean, and it's something that I like 100%. Like my auction could have gone completely different. Like within day one, whatever day it was, day one, I could have gotten stuck with a really expensive Miles Sanders and a really expensive. I think Josh Jacobs was the other player. I'm trying to think who it was, and to the point where like I would have had $100 some tied up between Miles Sanders and Josh Jacobs and probably would have been done bidding for a couple days. To getting freed out of that one to then freaking out over Kyle Pitts to the point where like, oh my God, I'm done. I messaged you immediately and I was like, dude, this is over. This is shit. I was pissed. I started talking in Minor and I was like, I can't believe this just happened. I'm done. And the freaking dude I reset came and got him instantly. I was like, you freaking dumbass. But, like, at the same time, like, I get it. I mean, whatever. He wants that guy. There was still a second copy. But he was also, I think he thought I was price enforcing him because he was one that then gave me fits the rest of the auction. Like, every time I was trying to get somebody, he was resetting them or bidding them up. But it was one of those things where I was like, I could have gotten royally screwed. And at that point, I think I played it much, much safer after the Kyle Pitts. Like, early on, I was bidding all over the place just to kind of drive players up. I think I was doing a lot of the driving up along with Miami of Ohio. But after that, like, the last couple of days, because I noticed the trend that the proxy bids were disappearing, and I didn't want to get stuck with any more players. I think I just kind of sat back and watched after that and just kind of essentially decided what I was going to pick. But oh my God, I got bailed out so many, at least 3 or 4 times. My team would have been terrible
Yeah.
if I didn't get bailed out.
So we're rolling up on almost 2 hours, and I wanted to kind of keep this as condensed as possible. So the last thing I'm going to pose is kind of just the auction as a whole, because this is the same format that I'm theoretically going to use next year. I think the clock was something that was at first much quicker than I think maybe people thought. I didn't realize players were going to come off the board as fast as they did, and I think that just shows we were, for the most part, used proxies really well, which I'm happy about. Or we're really good at letting players off the board as a league as a whole and have just differences. I think the clock, how did you guys feel about the 12-hour clock for first and foremost?
That was just enough. I thought it was good. 12 hours is good enough where you can check in. Like, I was pretty busy the first 2 weeks of the auction. I was able to check in and bid up players I wanted to, and I think it was just a matter of the ACC in particular, because I was in that conference. They just had really good proxies, and they knew where they wanted to go with their money. So I thought it was a good timer.
Yeah, I think I heard we had a little bit of grumbling that the 12-hour clock is very fast, and then I think once players once a lot of the budget was gone, it almost felt like it swung the other way, where 12 hours was
right,
really
it's too
slow.
Right.
But I think overall it had a really good blend that I'm interested to see how it goes next year. I personally thought this was going to be a longer auction, and I was going to be really worried about fatigue happening, but I think we got done in like a week.
Way quicker than I thought.
I
way
thought
quicker.
so too.
And some of that too. I think we had some people that took it seriously, and I mean, obviously there were some that weren't, but like, if we had more people that were like Army and whatever, I think we did a pretty good job of staying on top of those guys. There's still a couple teams that at least I'm personally keeping an eye on. But I think we got some good guys. There's a good group in here. And I think all of that stuff helps. People that have done the format obviously helps. But I think really, out of 100 people, if we only had, 4 or 5 that were needed to be removed or less than that, I can't remember what the final number was. I think we did really good with that. I think the only thing with the clock is, again, I mean, it's part of the strategy with it. A lot of people in minor were coming off the board between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m.
Yeah, Big Ten got into a cycle once the weekday happened, that bidding would be going on early in the morning, and then once 5 p.m. hit, and it was just like those 2 windows where all the bidding and players would come off either in between, right, or, which is fine because that's how the weekday kind of is going to go. But it definitely was something I noticed too. So I kind of fell into this cyclical form of bids.
Yeah, so the minor just fell into the timing of people were coming off the board super early, and I was like, usually again I'm no problem with it. I set an alarm for that kind of shit and reset the players or check it or whatever, but I've been too tired. Then again, my strategy this time was a little different, so I wasn't pressing, but I think that was my only probably real thing about the clock was just with how people were bidding or using it, guys were holding on to nominations, guys weren't resetting until certain times, so we'd go through periods. I mean, I said it a little earlier, where okay, some guys just got one and it's 7 or 8 hours before the next guy even gets close to coming off the board. And so it was just weird that things kind of fell into that pattern, but a lot of guys in minor came off the board between 2 and 5 a.m. just because everybody would reset players when they get home from work or whatever it was.
The other thing,
I don't think there's any issues with it.
I'll mention is that we were pretty good about keeping boards really full. I think there were most of the time 90% to 100% nominations being used, which is something that I think is good. I think what I realized once we got through most of this is that it's best to do that incremental increase in nominations, especially as the auction kind of peters out, that there is definitely an overload for teams to kind of manage all the nominations, all the different copies. That's another thing, is something I might have to try to find a way to work through. It should be less frustrating this next few years because we have things like the eligibility numbers on the copy information on MFL should be updated now, and you have a set roster. You can see these players, know who's owned up front, where that wasn't really the case this time around. But I might have to find a way to try to show better representation of which copies are available if it's easy. It might not be easy, and then it's going to be too much work for me, and we might not be able to do it.
Yeah, I would.
But
I think the bigger thing is probably just giving people avenues to know where to find that information on their own. If you're going in the direction I think you're going with this, it came up in minor a couple of times where teams were like, oh, well, I didn't know that was the second copy already that went through. If I'd have known, I'd have bid him up, or I'd have bid on it. I had no issues personally tracking that information, so I'm not sure why so many others had issues.
I think some
during the auction.
I think some were familiar with MFL. We had some people who haven't used it before. I think some just don't know all the different reports on MFL. And I think there are some instances where MFL is just a shit show when it comes to showing that information, because they aren't designed to hold a league like this. That's just not what they were built to do. We've just kind of figured out ways to work around it to make it feasible. And so there's only so much we can do with those types of information sets, it's either going to require me to do a lot of heavy lifting, which is not something I'm necessarily
Yeah, I
looking
wouldn't.
to do.
I wouldn't. I just think we need to do a job. I mean, that was one of my notes for moving into to next year's. Looking into the future. I think if we can do something that at least where everybody's looking in the same place or not looking, because again, like I was fairly active in watching guys and seeing guys and knowing what player copy it was, so I never had that issue. So for other people to have it, I don't know if they're looking in the wrong places or they don't know where to look, because there's multiple ways to look. I mean, you can go through the transaction history on the individual player, or you can go through auctions one or the trans. I mean, there are all kind of ways.
History was something that was super beneficial because the auction summary report wasn't necessarily beneficial.
Right. Yeah. Right. So that's where I think a lot of people were looking in there, and I think I made note of that to a couple people that asked early on, and then those who missed it because they were either not actively in the chat or whatever it is. The best way to track all that stuff is transaction history. So I want to make sure that we make note of that probably going into next year, so that people can see that, because I think that honestly was probably the biggest worthwhile complaint in terms of any kind of change, like any type of feedback that I at least saw from the auction. The timer and the other shit is all kind of what it is, but being able to get the information of what copy is this guy, is this Joe Burrow 2 or is this Joe Burrow 1, because when you do have at least for the minor, you've got 20 teams times 2, you got 40 guys on the board. It would be nice to be able to know where to go to know if that's a first or second copy. So I think that's something that maybe we should make like a screen grab or just a little thing so that people know where to look. Someone made one for Army's dumbass to get into the auction, so I don't think it's too hard to do, like the thing where you follow the mouse and you click on it and open it up and then spin the mouse around in a circle a couple of times so that it shows you where you're looking. But
what I might end up doing is putting those links all in the league links that can be found on the main page. I'm going to do that for the scheduling, the almanac, those types of things for the league, but it might be best to just give quick links to like the transaction page, the report for.
Yeah, I think that'd be beneficial, because again, like I was like, how do people not know where to look? Because the information's there, you just have to know where to find it. But at the same time, like I don't want somebody to be like, their strategy is completely different because they've got the wrong information. So I want to make sure that everybody's got access to the right and accurate information.
So when
we do the rookie auction.
Last thing I want to touch base on is this might be too big.
Did you schedule me for week 4?
No.
Is that what this is?
We're not playing week 4. Is scheduling. So scheduling is something that we have opened up. If people who have watched haven't been aware, I apologize, I can't get this to fit right now for the stream. But it's been open, so we've had quite a bit of activity in the schedule chat. A lot of people have scheduled games and they've confirmed them, and I don't know what the percentage is of things, but you can see a lot of people have put in a lot of games, which is really encouraging and really cool to see so much activity from all of these guys. So if you haven't yet, consider jumping in. There is some strategy that we talked about in our strategy podcast piece. So feel free to get that stuff in there. There are a few hiccups with this, so I'm going to leave some caveats that, one, if you put in a submission and you haven't talked to anyone about playing that game yet, they are not going to know about it. There's no way that this notifies people. 2, if you put more than one submission in for one game, so if you put 2 submissions in, like this is Jake wanted to play Mike of Oregon, and he puts in 2 submissions for that, maybe accidentally or didn't think something loaded, it's going to mess with the sheet. I need a 1-for-1 lookup, so if there's ever a 2, even if it's for a different team wanting to play that team, it messes with this page. So if you see pending, there usually is a factor as to why. Either someone hasn't confirmed the game, there's a double submission somewhere, someone put the wrong input in, or someone is just randomly put a game in at requesting to play and they haven't notified someone. So those are some of the reasons why a pending would happen. I've tried to work through things, but this is a pretty easy to read chart, I think, for the most part. People know who they play. They shouldn't really be feasibly scheduling games against other teams, so just knowing stuff. I don't know if you guys have any comments about scheduling at this point. I think it's gone rather smoothly. You guys are the ones probably doing a lot of the scheduling, so if there's any comments you guys have about how it's gone, I think it's gone rather well.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Had to back out
uh,
of a week, but that's about
Yes,
it.
screw you.
I need to play a stronger opponent, so I picked Joey. We'll see how that goes. And I can't
Not
find my
good.
name on here actually.
Oh yeah, well
Your team is like literally the 4th one down.
I spelled his last name wrong.
He put.
but your last name's
Spell my
Banana
last-
Man, right?
No, that's not my last name. But you know what? I'll take it. Banana Man. I need a week 6. I think I fucked that up, but that's okay. Yeah, scheduling's good. Scheduling's fun. I think I have the hardest schedule other than Kent State.
I don't think Joey's team is
No, it's
that
not good
great
either. It's
but
better than yours. but it's
Oregon, and Colorado State are 2 really, really tough opponents there. I think that's an interesting schedule. But yeah, no, this is gone. I really like this actually, Brian. I think this is nice. My only thing would be like, don't fuck around with the schedule, like Brian said. I mean, it throws the thing off if you put it in 2-3 times, or you're
pretty
putting
easy
in
to
people
break.
that. Yeah, don't schedule people. Like, talk to people first. That's what the channel's for. Use the scheduling channel. PM somebody. Do it that way. Don't blindly start sending out invites this way, because it doesn't go to anybody. It'll just show a pending in your slot with no idea that anybody is supposed to accept that. So,
And this is what I'll say too. So I'll try to iron all this stuff out. But if there's pending games by the time I set the final schedule, those don't get scheduled that way. So they won't. If Mike, who's Florida State, has this pending game or this pending game still, those will be randomized, and they won't have a say in how that was scheduled. Even if they had a tentative verbal or agreement over text or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's got to be confirmed in the sheet. One other comment that I think I'm going to go through with next season is definitely the idea from Wade of Washington State is putting before scheduling starts to announce the division schedule. I think that just kind of makes sense. It's not actually extra work for me when I thought about it a bit longer. It should just be pretty easy to replicate that or get that posted. And just as a disclaimer,
yeah, it shouldn't be hard.
Yeah, just as a disclaimer, the schedule in MFL is not correct. So people, I've gotten a few questions of that. Disregard that schedule. That's just a placeholder. I've been testing things to make sure that what my process works. But this is the schedule that'll be built off. The Division 1 will be announced probably in August still. I'm going to stick with that timeline because that's what I've set, unless the league continues to pressure me to do things, which you guys made me up this time.
There's no race, so don't freaking pressure it, because you're gonna run out of things to do. This would have been really, really cool to do next week or two when there was no other CFF football stuff going on, but that's okay.
Yeah, everyone's super
That's
excited.
okay, Brian.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay that
Which
they
is
did
amazing. Like I like that, and again, I don't want to take shots at NCFF, but I like the amount of people that took it upon themselves to schedule games already, and we weren't supposed to schedule until
2 more weeks.
June 1 or whatever that date was, is just insane. Like, it's something to be really kind of excited about, because there's this many people that are actively, again, I don't think everybody's looking at strategy, but at least they're actively participating in stuff like that. So I think that that's really, really, really encouraging for this year, and then obviously into the future of this league, because there seem to be a lot of people that are enjoying this.
Oh, I agree. All right, so I don't have anything else. I'm going to leave any other questions that you guys had or comments. Otherwise, I'll let you guys get about your day. It's been over 2 hours that me and Jake at least have been doing this. I bet he's up to level 60 on WoW by now.
I need to go. Yeah, that's the only thing. I wish it was an hour less. I could have, could have been level 60 by now.
Bro.
All right,
I
guys.
do have-
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I do have one question while I've got a couple admins here on this chat here.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought about, it's a bit of an edge case, but how are you guys gonna handle the future state where say both copies of a player in a conference get transferred, one has been redshirted, one hasn't. How are you guys gonna handle nominating of the specific copy that is one class versus another?
I've thought about this, Andy.
I don't know what Brian plans to do, but the easiest thing is I can create custom players. I don't know if Brian is as comfortable with that, but I think we can do it
Let
that
me
way.
talk, Lewis. Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian. That's what I would do. But I
Custom
don't know what
players.
Brian's gonna do.
Custom players will definitely be something that will have to be utilized because we'll get to the point with like red shirts when someone's graduated and someone has still eligibility that I know people will nominate both of them even though there won't be the player in the pool because I'm gonna have to use can't add lists every year and I'll probably have to use custom players to some degree. But one of the questions that I've thought about too, and Andy's mentioned, is what happens when both copies get transferred and one's got a red shirt and one doesn't. So what I'm thinking of doing at that capacity is that the first copy that goes is the one with the extra year of eligibility. If they both have the same eligibility or they both have red shirts, then it would go to the team that had transferred them first. So the first copy that gets dropped would get the first amount. And then if there's a copy that had a medical versus not a medical, the copy that has that medical eligibility will be the first copy as well, is what I'm thinking, and I'll probably hardwire that into the rules.
Couldn't we just make a copy that says, Dwayne Haskins, red shirt, sophomore,
Yeah.
and then have a Dwayne Haskins junior copy?
We can. I think I'll have to test if those will show up as twice in the pool, because then it's going to get real messy. Just like
Okay, I was gonna say we might have to play with it. We might be able to play with it.
Yeah, and then also not being able to nominate both at the same time if you're using a custom player, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So those are things we'll have to figure out, and I've thought about it. I'm not sure the best process of doing it. And it might be
You
one
can
of the
do it
growing,
separately that way.
It might be something that'll be a growing pain that we're going to have to really think about. But we'll see.
It might not happen all that often either, so it might not be something we're sweating about. I mean,
True.
yeah, eventually it might happen. It might happen here more so than it would in NCFF. I think it's only happened once in NCFF that I can think of. Or
Well,
I'm smoking something.
We've
But
had custom players in NCFF because of the whole duplicate issue, and that's something that
Right.
I'm familiar with doing. But they only have one copy in there, so it's the custom player, and that's it.
right.
Yeah. So something I've thought about. Still not sure the best process of doing it will be something I have to test, but yeah, it's definitely on my mind, Andy, when it comes to those things, because it'll be something that comes up for sure.
Sweet. Yeah, time will tell.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. I will put this up on YouTube as soon as I can so people can rewatch it. But I appreciate your time and thanks for joining us. And we'll probably do more of these in August when it comes to coaches polls and stuff like that. We'll get to that piece. So thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Shut up.